So, who murdered this whole family, and why are there no skulls with any of the bodies? So in today's video I'll be discussing the Hinterkaifeck murders. You'll have to excuse my pronunciation throughout this video because it is located in Germany and some of the words are quite difficult to pronounce. As I always say, I don't mean to disrespect anyone involved in the case, I'm just gathering a load of evidence that I found online and then putting it into a video for research purposes. So at the end of the video, I'll be giving a little overview of each of the different suspects, and as this case is unsolved and no one quite knows who the murderer is, what I'd like you to do is basically put in the comments who you think the murderer is from the little extracts that I've given at the end of the video. So a little bit of background is that the Hinterkaifeck is actually a small farmstead situated between two Bavarian towns in Munich. On the evening of the 31st of March 1922, the 6 inhabitants were killed at the farm by a mattock. The murders remain unsolved, and still to this day, nobody really knows who exactly killed this family. And I think this is the first ever unsolved video that I've ever done on the channel. The 6 victims were parents Andreas Gruber, aged 63, and Siegl Gruber, aged 72. Their daughter Victoria Gabriel, aged 35, and then Victoria's children, Siegl, aged 7, and Joseph, aged 2. And also the maid of the house, Maria Baumgartner, aged 44. Hinterkaifeck was like the unofficial house name, and this house was actually located in the woods. Strange things started to occur in and around the Hinterkaifeck. 6 months before the murders, the family maid had actually quit, claiming that she heard strange sounds and that she believed that the house was haunted. Andreas Gruber found a strange newspaper from Munich on the property in March of 1922. He couldn't remember buying it and just believed that the postman had lost it. This was not the case, however, as nobody in the vicinity actually subscribed to this specific newspaper. Just days before the murder, Gruber had actually informed neighbours that he'd found footprints that were leading from the forest to the Hinterkaifeck home. While this alone was not really unsettling, it was the fact that the footprints were leading from the forest to the house. Again, quite unnerving to him. Around this time, one of the family house keys had actually gone missing. The family also reportedly observed a man with a moustache that was seen to be walking around the home quite often. During the night, the family would hear footsteps, and when Andreas Gruber went to go check it out, he confirmed that nobody was actually there. Although he told quite a lot of people about these alleged observations, he accepted no help from anyone, and the details went unreported to the police. According to a school friend of Siegl, the young girl reported that her mother Victoria had actually fled the farm the night before the act after a violent quarrel and was found hours later to be wandering around in the forest. 33 years later to this, the school friend's story had actually changed, and she claimed that it wasn't actually Victoria Gabriel but her grandmother Siegl Gruber. This is the younger girl who's also named the same as her grandmother, and she was the one that had actually in fact fled the scene and gone to the forest. On the afternoon of March 31st, 1922, which was a Friday, the new maid Maria Baumgartner, I think that's how you pronounce it, arrived at the farm. Her sister had escorted her there and left her to go to work. After a short stay speaking with them, she was possibly the last person to have seen them all alive. A few hours later, the 6 inhabitants at the Hinterkaifeck would be dead. It is impossible to reconstruct the exact events of what happened that night without some speculations around it. But some of the details after the speculations are clear from doing the investigations. It appears that in the late evening, Victoria Gabriel, her 7-year-old daughter Siegl, and her parents Andreas and Siegl Gruber were lured into the family barn through the stables. And at this point in the stables is where they were murdered, what seemed to be one at a time. The perpetrator or perpetrators actually used a mattock to kill the family, and a mattock is like a type of pickaxe, and this mattock actually belonged to the family and was kept in the barn. And it is said that they actually got blows to the head, which was the thing that killed them. It's unclear whether the family went to the barn as part of like a routine check, maybe to check on the animals, but it's still not clear as to why the whole family, apart from 2, including the maid, had actually gone out to the farm, or if it's something out of the ordinary that caused them to go to this part of the estate. Later, however, experiments proved that from the barn, you wouldn't have been able to hear screams if you were in any other part of the estate. So that might have been why they were all able to be lured into this place, because if it was like one at a time and one person was taken down to the barn and then they were screaming, nobody from inside the house or, like I say, anywhere else would have been able to hear, so it wouldn't have drawn that much attention. So the person who knew most about the vicinity and everything, they were more likely to be the ones that have been committing the crime. The perpetrator or perpetrators then moved from the barn through the stables and towards the living quarters, where, with the same murder weapon, killed young maid Maria in her bedchambers. Presumably, they killed Joseph, the young 2-year-old boy, last, who slept in his bassinet in his mother's bedroom. 4 days had passed between the murders and the actual discovery of the bodies. On April 1st, coffee sellers Hansen Edward Shurovsky arrived in Hinterkaifeck to place an order. When no one actually responded to the knocks, they went looking around the building, through the windows and through the doors. They then walked around the yard and couldn't seem to find anyone. They only noticed that the gate to the machine house was actually left open before they decided to leave. Karl Gabriel was absent without excuse from school, and the family didn't actually show up to their Sunday worship. On April 3rd, the postman Joseph Mayer, when he was delivering his post, actually noticed that Saturday's mail was still sat in the postbox and had not been touched. Assembler Albert Hoffner actually went to Hinterkaifeck on April 4th to repair the engine of the food chopper. He stated that he had not seen any of the family but only heard the animals in the barn, and then also noting the barking dog which they had. After waiting for about an hour, he decided to start his repair, and this repair took 4.5 hours. After he completed his repair, he noticed that the barn door was actually open, but could not say for certain whether or not the barn door was open when he got there, or if it was closed and had been opened in his visit. He did, however, peek into the barn, but didn't really go inside. In Groben, he met the daughters of the village guide, Lauren Schittelbauer, and told them that the repairs in Hinterkaifeck were completed. Hoffner also told Georg, the mayor of Wangen, about the ghostly emptiness of the Hinterkaifeck. Schittelbauer then sent his 2 sons, Johann and Joseph, to Hinterkaifeck to see if they could make contact with the family. When they reported back to him that they hadn't seen anyone or anything, Schittelbauer then headed to the farm the same day with Michael Paul and Jakob Siegl, at which time they discovered the mostly concealed bodies in the barn and home. Inspector George Reingruber and his colleagues from the Munich Police Department then investigated the killings. More than 100 suspects have been questioned over the years, with the most recent questioning taking place in 1986. None of the questionings, however, yielded any conclusive results. The day after the discovery of the bodies, court physician Johann Baptist Amuller performed the autopsies in the barn. It was established that the mattock I described earlier was the most likely used murder weapon, although the weapon itself was not actually at the scene of the crime. Evidence shows that the younger Karl Gabriel had actually been alive a few hours after. She had actually torn her hair out in tufts lying in the straw next to her grandparents and own mother. The skulls of the corpses were then sent to Munich, where clairvoyants examined them to no avail. The heads were then actually later lost, possibly destroyed in the Allied bombings of World War II. The police first suspected the motive to be a robbery, and they interrogated travelling craftsmen, vagrants, and several inhabitants from the surrounding villages. When a large amount of money was actually found inside Hinterkaifeck, they abandoned this theory, and it was actually clear that the perpetrator or perpetrators had actually spent a lot of time after the murders in the Hinterkaifeck home. Someone had fed the cattle, someone had eaten an entire supply of the bread that was in the kitchen, and had recently cut meat from the pantry. Neighbours also reported that smoke was coming from the chimney the whole weekend as well. The perpetrator or perpetrators would have easily found the money that was left in the building if it was considered to be a robbery. But as this money was left untouched, the intentions of a robbery were kind of out of the window again. With no clear motive to be gleaned from the crime scene, police started to begin formulating a list of suspects. Now I'm going to go through each of the different suspects, but there's no official finger pointing to who it could be. Some are more likely than others, but I'm not going to say who. I'm going to leave that to you to decide and then put your comments down below. So suspect number 1, Karl Gabriel. He's the husband of Victoria Gabriel, and he was reportedly killed in December 1914 during the First World War. However, his body has actually never been recovered. After the murders, people had actually speculated whether or not he was in fact murdered in the war. Victoria Gabriel had given birth to Joseph illegitimately in her husband's absence, although there were rumours that 2-year-old Joseph was actually the son to her father, Andres Gabriel, where both of them had an incestual relationship and was actually brought up in court and was known throughout the village. Some theorise that Karl Gabriel killed the family as some sort of revenge. Although soldiers testified to his death and police were inclined to believe them, this theory gained new nourishment over the years, after people reportedly had believed to have met Gabriel, or could confirm that he exchanged his identity with that of the fallen comrade. There is no proving that he is in fact the Hinterkaifeck killer, but from these theories, he is considered a suspect. Suspect number 2, Lorenz Schittelbauer. Lorenz Schittelbauer, in 1918, shortly after the death of his first wife, carried on a relationship with Victoria Gabriel. It is possible that he had fathered Joseph, as his initials did appear on the boy's birth certificate. perhaps he was to have killed the family because Victoria had come after him for alimony. He was suspected by the locals as the perpetrator because of several telling acts that he committed during the discovery of the bodies. When they had first come to investigate, Schittelbauer and his friends had actually had to break a gate because all the doors were locked. After finding the 4 bodies in a barn, his 2 companions left the stables shocked, while Schittelbauer went into the house alone, where he was familiar with all the surroundings, like as if he knew them well. As he went in, he said that he was looking for his son. When he entered the house, the other men clearly heard him unlock the door with a key. It seemed that this was the key that went missing a few days before the murders took place, although it is possible that Schittelbauer had actually had a key for numerous other reasons. He also disturbed the bodies at the scene, completely ruining the initial investigation. Still, he claimed he did it because he was looking for his son, the illegitimate Joseph. Even years later, suspicion fell on Schittelbauer because of his unusual comments that he made. According to reports in the files for the case, local teacher Hans Blauer, I think, not too sure, I'll put his name up, surprised Schittelbauer on the demolished remains of the Hinterkaifeck in 1925, at which time Schittelbauer, frightful and confused, mentioned an attempt by the perpetrator to bury the bodies. Schittelbauer reportedly commented on this by saying that the ground was too cold and frozen over to have buried any of the bodies in it. And this seemed like something that the perpetrator would be the only one to know about, but again, this was kind of like not overruled, but like maybe justified by the fact that he lived in the area and he knew about the weather, so it's kind of a bit on that one. So, suspect number 3, Peter Weber. Peter Weber was named the suspect by Joseph Betts. The two worked together in the winter of 1919 and 1920, where they worked as labourers and shared a chamber together. According to Betts, Weber in the Times spoke about a remote farm named Hinterkaifeck. Weber knew that an old couple lived there with their daughter and her 2 children. It is likely that he knew about the incest between Gruber and Gruber's daughter. Betts testified in court that Weber had actually suggested killing the family and the old man to get their money, but when Betts did not respond to the offer, Weber apparently stopped talking about it. So number 4 is actually suspects. So this is the Bichler brothers and Georg Siegl. The former maid Crescens Rieger worked from November 1920 to about September 1921. She suspected that the 2 brothers, Anton and Karl Bichler, were in fact murderers. Anton Bichler had actually helped out with a potato harvest at Hinterkaifeck, and therefore knew about the premises. I'm not saying that it was actually him that committed the crime, but when I mentioned earlier about someone knowing about the surrounding area of Hinterkaifeck, that could be pinpointed towards someone more likely like this person. Rieger said Bichler talked to her often about the Gruber and Gabriel family. Anton reportedly suggested that the family ought to be dead for some reason. The maid also emphasised in her interrogation that the farm dog, who barked at everyone, never in fact barked at Anton. So this might be one of the reasons why none of the commotion or anything was heard by anyone, because if the dog wasn't barking from the sight of this person, then he could have been left unnoticed and left alone to do things, like in quiet. In addition, she reported speaking to a stranger through her bedroom window at night. The maid believed it to have been Karl Bichler, the brother of Anton. She thought that Anton and Karl had committed the crimes together with Georg Siegl, who had all worked at the Hinterkaifeck and knew of the family's fortune. Supposedly, Siegl had broken into the home in November of 1920 and reportedly stolen a few items, although he did actually deny this. However, he did actually confirm that he was the one that carved the handle to the murder weapon that was used when he was actually working at Hinterkaifeck, and this would actually have been kept inside the barn. So they're all the suspects that I've just read out then. If you would leave your comments down below, that would be great, and I'd like to read what some of your opinions have to be on them. And now I'm going to go through what the results of the whole investigation were. Despite repeated arrests, no murderers have actually been found, and the files were closed in 1955. Nevertheless, like I say, the last interrogations took place in 1986. In 2007, the police academy students in First and Philbrook examined the case using modern criminal investigation techniques. They concluded that it was impossible to definitively pinpoint someone as the murderer on this case, as so much time has passed since it occurred. The primitive techniques at the time yielded little evidence, and in the decades since the murders, evidence has been lost and suspects have since died. Despite these setbacks, the students did actually come up with a prime suspect who they believed to have committed the crime, but out of respect to the still living family, but they remained unnamed. The dead are without their skulls, buried in the cemetery at Weerhofen, and a memorial stone was erected at their grave. The skulls of the dead were last kept in a justice building in Augsburg and were likely destroyed by a bomb attack in the Second World War, and then the Hinterkaifeck farm was actually demolished in 1923. In the inspection record of the court commission, it was noted that the victims were probably drawn into the barn by restlessness in the stables in a result of animal noises. Again, a later attempt was actually found that the screams from the barn would not have been able to be heard from the living quarters, so this wouldn't have drawn the attention of the people inside. This raises the question as why the 4 eldest members of the family actually went to the barn in the first place. Like, how did they get all of them to there? The exact sequence of events that took place that night cannot be confirmed, as there were only like 5 pictures that had been taken at the scene. 2 of the bodies in the barn, one of the dead maid in her chamber, one of Joseph's bassinet in Victoria's bedroom, and an outside view from the yard. A reconstruction based on the positioning of the bodies in the barn revealed that Victoria Gabriel was likely the first murder victim. Next was likely the elder Kezilla Gruber, followed by her husband Andras Gruber, and finally Kezilla Gabriel. In the house, the maid must have been killed first and then again Joseph. The assumption has often been made that the killer was in fact on the premises and inside the house before the act. That could be the reports of hearing the walking about, and also based on stories that Andras had actually told his neighbours about. Some of the evidence from this theory included shifted roof tiles and hollows in the hay, but these were later interpreted as like possible hiding places for the incestual activity that was going on. This would explain why these like irregularities that had been in the roof and also in the hay had gone unnoticed by Andras. If he had in fact done what he said he did, where he searched the farm several times, he would have been able to see these. On the night of the crime, 3 days before the bodies were discovered, the artisan Michael Plockel happened to pass by Hinterkaifeck. Plockel had observed that the oven had actually been heated by someone, and that person had approached him with a flashlight which was like blinding him. He was shining it in his eyes, whereupon he hastily continued on his way. Plockel also noticed that the smoke from the fireplace had like a disgusting smell as well. This instance was not actually investigated, and there was no investigations conducted to suggest what had actually been burnt that night. On the 1st of April at 3 o'clock in the morning, the farmer and butcher Simon Reislander, on the way home near Brunnen, saw 2 unknown figures at their end of the forest. When the strangers saw him, they both turned around so that their faces couldn't have been seen. Later, when he heard about the murders at Hinterkaifeck, he suspected that the 2 people he saw at the edge of the forest that turned around were in fact the people responsible for them. The fitter, Albert Hoffner, was actually at Hinterkaifeck for several hours, doing repair work, but was only questioned in 1925, as the police had actually failed to conduct an interrogation like days after the crime. His statement suggests that the perpetrator was back in the yard during the time that he conducted his repair. The doors to the house had been locked and he'd not met anyone, but he did actually hear the dog barking from inside. At the end of his repair, he said that the dog was actually tied up outside and the barn had been open. When the men discovered the bodies later, and the dog was actually inside the barn with the victims and the barn door was closed. In the middle of May 1927, a stranger was said to have stopped a resident of Weidhofen at midnight. He asked him questions about the murder and then shouted, "I am the murderer," and ran off, which was really weird. And then running off into the woods to never be seen again, and who this man was has never been identified. The personal environment of the victims had been insufficiently investigated. This applies particularly to Maria Baumgartner. The murders happened a few hours after her arrival to Hinterkaifeck. The possibility that the murders related to her presence at Hinterkaifeck were never actually investigated. Like I said, again, robbery was the first and most likely motive, which in addition the complex and overly brutal nature of the act, which wiped out an entire family, including young children, as well as to conceal the murders and placement of the bodies, suggest an emotional relationship between the killer and his victims. In the 1970s, when the sacristy of the St. Vitus Church, I think it is, in Hagelstad was demolished, a death picture of the family was actually found in the church book, and nobody has any idea as to how or why it got there. So that brings us to the end of this video. I do apologise for how muddled up some parts have been, but it was a very strange one when researching, and it's still been unanswered to this day. So what do you think happened, and who out of the suspects do you think would be most likely to have committed the crime? Please do leave a like and be sure to subscribe to the channel, as it does really help, and I'm almost at 500 subscribers, which is mad. Make sure you do turn on notifications by tapping the bell icon to be reminded about new videos every single Tuesday for my new True Crime Tuesday upload schedule, where I'll be uploading videos every single week. So yeah, thank you for watching.